Have you ever wanted to get inside the inner workings of high-profile criminal cases? True Crime and Human Design explores thrilling stories that reevaluate themes through an energetic lens. What new details and pockets of understanding might we see when we apply a human design filter to some of life's darkest corners? I'm your host, Corrine Araujo, and this is True Crime and Human Design. Hi, loves. I hope you're enjoying our release of Aileen Wuornos. There were a few things that we did not get to discuss because Aileen's history is so complex. And that's just what happens. Like I've explained before, part of the reason why I love human design and combining it with the gene keys is because it's complex, it's nuanced, and that is so representative of who we are as people. We're complex, we're nuanced. That being said, there are a few little special extras I'd like to speak to. Specifically, I want to start by looking at her radiance, which can also be referred to as her aura. In the gene keys, it's the unconscious sun. In human design, this is the incarnation cross. So you'll see if you pull up genetic matrix, it does incarnation cross, lax migration 1, and you're like, what the hell does that mean? Seriously. So ultimately, it's encompassing the conscious sun, conscious earth, unconscious sun, and unconscious earth. In the gene keys, this is your life's work. This is your evolution. This is your radiance, and this is your purpose. And these 4 archetypes really make up your activation sequence, which are your 4 prime gifts, really your genius, and they're so much deeper than that. I feel like gifts, genius, activation doesn't even do it justice because it's just so deep. Anyways, we are going to speak right now on her unconscious sun, which is her radiance or her aura in the gene keys. You'll see that it's in 5.1. So the gene keys, you get the shadow, you get the gift, and you have the city. And the city is ultimately the highest essence. When we have tapped into our gift, when we're activating our gift, then we may experience moments of being in our highest essence. I know I can recall times when I'm in and out of that space. The goal is for consciousness one day to exist in that highest essence, right? That will keep evolving consciousness, become more aware, become more understanding, cultivate more love, and reach that space. However, with life and with the chaos of life, we have the shadow state. For Gene Key 5, specifically, the shadow is impatience. The gift is patience, and the city is timelessness. So what does this mean? Ultimately, look at what impatience is. You're impatient. You're ready to go. I think this is so crucial to point out for so many reasons for Aileen. But if you look at Gene Key 5, something that I really see is just this fixed rhythm. This beat of the drum is attuned and aligned with the frequencies of the universe. You're so tapped in, you're so attuned, you're moving at this pace with the universe. You're not trying to rush past it, you're not trying to slow it. A person with this gene key or gate who is really activating the gift part of it is stepping into this idea that every single step is bringing us closer to our goal. It feels so calming and so grounding rather than, shit, I feel overwhelmed. And I'm thinking of Gene Key 9 of experiencing this inertia because you're looking at all of the things that you have to get done, and it's overwhelming you because you know that you can't get to the top of the mountain without taking the steps in between. Similar to that is this gene key 5. This gene key is talking about the pulse of life and universal patterns. So at its lowest frequency, it has this deep distrust of life. Being that it's her radiance, it's her aura, this ultimately is what keeps her healthy. So embracing this universal pace, this universal flow, this attunement to life and having trust in life will allow her to develop patience, to not be forcing against the grain or not be really pessimistic. Of course, with her experiences, I would expect nothing less than for her to, especially it's on the unconscious side, so for her to be really experiencing in her aura the shadow state, which is the state of impatience. How do I see this come up for her? If you watch her mannerisms, I know like in American Horror Story, on Devil's Night, when she comes, you'll see she does the hair flips, she licks her lips a lot. There's a lot of almost this twitching and spazzing nature. And that encompasses the shadow state of the 5 because she's impatient. Her nervous system is pushing against the grain. It doesn't trust life. So by not trusting life, she's constantly on edge. What this impatience really encompasses is there's a fear that there's no underlying order to the universe, right? No underlying meaning or reason for things feeds into this concept or idea of what is the purpose? What is the reason? And when someone falls into a state of not having a purpose, of not seeing the reason in life, that's actually one of the most dangerous things that we can experience. When a person feels like they have nothing to lose because what is life and what am I even doing and what has it even done for me? That is an individual who can commit acts against themselves, can commit harmful acts against others. And it's ultimately just succumbing to feeling as though life is worthless, and in turn, you're worthless and hopeless. There's this feeling of no matter what she's trying to do or this stability she's trying to create, she can't achieve it. And in turn, her body doesn't feel safe. And again, you see this very much with the nervous tics that she does, the flipping of the hair, the licking of the lips, the mouth, the mannerism. As a 5-1, the one line unconsciously, specifically, focuses on the bones and forming that core stability in the bones. If she doesn't have core stability, if she can't feel solitude, if she can't feel grounded in her physical body, then we're going to see some ticking, right? If you think of when someone is in the sympathetic state for their nervous system, this is the fight or flight. So you're going to have someone pacing. That's what also this 5 very much governs and relates to. I really look at the 5 and the 35 as such an example of the vagus nerve and understanding polyvagal theory, going in and out of this ventrovagal state where we look to connect, where we seek engaging with others, where we're able to go into a rest and digest state. We ultimately feel safe. And then on the other end of that, we go into our sympathetic state, which is the fight or flight. And then we can go into the dorsal vagal, which is the collapse. That is immobilized, that's dissociating. With that said, you'll see that it's coming from the sacral. The sacral is really this creative life force energy. It's looking to create, rebirth, bring joy, bring pleasure. It's literally the life force of humanity. So here we see the 5 in the sacral. It's reaching up to our identity. And it's saying we need to attune to the universe in order to create, in order to gain pleasure, in order to move forward. We have to ultimately become attuned to our environment, which makes sense. If you're not attuned to your environment, then you're actually in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, this is when we see harmful external behaviors like ones that she displayed. Of course, these harmful behaviors can be less. They don't have to all resort in death. However, that physical violence, that physical aggression, that verbal aggression, self-sabotaging, anything that causes or creates harm is what comes out as external behaviors when we're in a survival state. So this is really setting the rhythm of the season. It fixes the timing of cell growth and decay in every living creature. It governs all patterns of animals and human migration. So when you see a distrust in humanity, in the universe, literally this distrust goes into your cells. When we don't trust ourselves, we're having visceral responses that aren't cultivating spaces for healthy relationship. Impatience is ultimately rooted in agitation. That said, all action arising from agitation is really going to be out of harmony with the universal whole. You see that agitation. You can hear it in her voice. You can see it in her mannerisms. You can see it in her flipping her hair and her licking her lips and her making the movements with her mouth and her putting her hands to her mouth. She also has one of her tones is taste. So one of her greatest senses, or her greatest sense in her environment, is taste. So you see this taste as in these are like the mouth breathers, like they're literally taking in the world. She does a lot of mouth movements. Combining that taste with her radiance, her aura is literally spilling out this complete disconnect from the world, this deep distrust. And in turn, part of her defense mechanisms, a coping strategy in response to this very deep distrust, and as she's taking it in, as she's tasting the world with her mouth, as she's breathing it in with her mouth, is to repel it out. So how is she repelling it out? Well, she's pushing it out through her physical body. She's having these nervous tics. When we look at the repressive and reactive nature of impatience, the repressive nature is pessimism. Ultimately, this is really the collapse state, and it comes from giving up on life. She's extremely pessimistic with tons of validation and good reasoning as to why she would be pessimistic. She's given up on life. We see that. She speaks of that. She advocates to not go through her trials and her experience and what she's gone through repeatedly and rush her to execution. The reactive nature is pushy. This works again with the nervous system, and this is more an extroverted manner rather than collapsing inwards to herself. She's constantly trying to push or force life's flow. This is really becoming aggravated and lashing out for no apparent reason. These people tend to manifest very inharmonious situations where the natural timing of life is really out of synchronization and nothing seems easy, as though literally life was being like, boom, I'm going to block your path. So again, it makes the situation worse, and she's snapping in this pressure, and you can see she almost feels like a ticking time bomb when you're talking to her. She goes in and out of this collapse state, which again, this is very vagus nerve. This is very polyvagal theory, and she's going into this collapse state of she's collapsing inward. She's giving up on life. And then depending on how you say something, depending on the way you look at her, you'll see her react with this very pushy, repelling nature and this aggressiveness. For her, I see her radiance just oozing this impatience. Think about when you're waiting to go somewhere. You're like, okay, we need to do the thing, we need to do the thing, we need to do the thing. Or your friends are taking forever, you know you're already running late. Maybe you're in traffic. What are you doing with your hands? What are you doing with your feet? What are you doing with your physical body? It's twitching, it's pacing, it's moving. This is her radiance. I also think it's super interesting with this 3740. So, for anyone that has already listened, or maybe even for new listeners that haven't listened to prior episodes, I go into way more detail in the 3740, specifically with Andrew Cunanan and Richard Ramirez. For that reason, I didn't want to go into extensive detail around the 3740, but if you would like more information, if you're really interested in these gates and just getting to know this energy a little bit more, highly recommend going to those 2 episodes. It frames it so nicely, my personal opinion. However, with 3740, what I actually just learned that 3740 really deals with your mouth. And I loved this even more. One, obviously for her, and two, I have seen this in action. My wife has the 3740 and she has it in her conscious sun and conscious earth, just like Aileen. And she also has an undefined throat, which Aileen has. And I think it intensifies the 3740, this motor functioning with your mouth, even more so. What I mean is that when my wife is super, super invested in what you're saying, and that investment could be like she's super interested, or you've just caught her attention for whatever reason, then she starts mouthing the words. She has no idea she's doing it. It's not like super obnoxious mouthing, but I can tell that she's processing. So you do see this with Aileen, in addition to that 5 with that impatience and it oozing out of her aura, the 3740, her conscious sun and conscious earth with an undefined throat of, okay, I'm going to process what you're saying. And she's a split definition. So she does have to have these connections with other people to really come to some sort of resolution or understanding or grounding space about whatever it is she is processing. So super fun fact. So understanding the purpose in the activation sequence is understanding this quality of consciousness that you're meant to bring forward. So it's not necessarily what you do, it's just this natural frequency that ultimately your presence brings awareness to the forefront. I have my purpose is in Gene Key 59, and that's the shadow is dishonesty, the gift is intimacy, and the city, the highest essence, is transparency. I was, for the greater part of my life, not honest with myself. And that's what dishonesty really looks at, is being dishonest with yourself. And part of something I always advocated for and helped people with was getting really honest with themselves. When I discovered this, I cried, but mainly because there's so many times where I've preached about being transparent. And even when I wasn't being transparent because I was being dishonest to myself, but even in friendships, in relationships, that's relationships of any scope, as in like work relationships, as in school acquaintances. Something I always would say is, I really don't care what another person does, just be transparent with me. In the field and with people, I always would tell people we have to be transparent with one another. We can't be completely transparent and we can't form deeper connections if we're being dishonest with ourselves. Oh, Corrine, you were preaching it, but you weren't being completely honest with yourself. So it was super interesting because, again, it was this unconscious quality that I was just constantly bringing to the surface of just opening up your heart, opening up yourself, and getting to know who you are in order to form a deeper relationship, not only with you, but when you do that, you're able to have deeper relationships with other people. Intimacy is ultimately not this sexual primal nature that is brought to the forefront right now. Intimacy is sharing awareness. It's connecting with other people and sharing values and feeling comfortable and safe to share values. It's creating these deeper connections. So this was very prominent in my life, and this quality and consciousness really played a role in how I worked with people and the work that I was able to do. And here it was in my purpose. Again, that quality of our consciousness. So hers is in Gene Key 35. And this is all about experience. It's actually a manifested channel when it's connected to the 3536, but because it doesn't have this, it's not reaching, it's not connecting, that 36 isn't defined, it's a hanging gate. So here in her emotions, as she looks for release, she releases into the ego, but also it's reaching towards the throat. So it wants to process, it wants to get the things out, it wants to say the things, and it's meeting a hanging gate of that 35, and vice versa. That 35 is hanging towards that emotional experience, that hunger, that drive to experience life and experience emotions and go through a process of crisis, which is the 36. So the 35, the shadow is hunger, the gift is adventure, and the siddhi is boundlessness. Actually, the 35 and the 36 were two of the first gene keys that led me into really understanding them at a level of mental health. Specifically, with hunger, the repressive nature is boredom or mania. So bored and manic. The reactive nature is manic. And we see that in diagnoses like bipolar disorder. This gene key is actually related to the secretion of serotonin within the body. So when we're in the shadow state, it's inhibited, there's a blockage, and what ultimately ends up happening is people are left with a perpetual feeling of hunger. So it drives people out into the world to try to find something that can bring an end to this hunger. And essentially, this hunger is all about human experiences. It's looking for that emotional experience. It wants to have a connection to that 36, which is all about humanity and compassion and turbulence and having those really big experiences. For hunger, we're not talking necessarily just about food, like I'm hungry and I need to feed myself. Yes, does this end up happening? Yeah. But this hunger is driven towards human experience. So this is really looking like drugs and food and sex, because this is bringing serotonin back into the body for a certain amount of time. That hunger brings immediate gratification. It seeks immediate gratification, and immediate gratification is really detrimental to our health because it's superficial. It's just filling a hole for a moment in time. And when we fill a hole for a moment in time, and then the Band-Aid rips right back open, we're constantly seeking to refill that hole, to cover that back up. I look at it as what's happening in the world. When we take behavioral approaches, especially to trauma, and we try to use behavioral interventions, ultimately, you're just putting a Band-Aid over it. It's not going to last because we are human, and that Band-Aid's going to rip right back open, and you're going to want to fill that void again because you don't want to feel the thing. This can lead into addictive tendencies, things that will make you feel like you don't have to experience the thing. And especially being with the one line, the unconscious one line, it's asking, how do you connect with others? How do you feel with others? Do you feel safe with others? Do you trust others? Ultimately, you work through this solitude, and solitude is understanding that it's not about isolation. It's about being okay, being alone within yourself. And you can have relationships and feel okay to just take some time for yourself and to just consciously exist. You don't need to constantly be reaching for attention, seeking relationships to fill up that time. So you trusting yourself is coming into play because they're programming partners, which is why they're together. The 5, again, is that impatience, and its programming partner is the 35. So she's going to feel this constant impatience with life and feeling like she needs to have another experience to feed that hunger. And she's looking to feed that hunger, and she's getting impatient because nothing is feeding the hunger. Am I painting an image for you? Can you picture it? I'm sure you can. Again, with the 5, it's about being attuned to the natural rhythm of life. And if you're not attuned to the natural rhythm of life, you're forcing against it or you're repressing inwards. And here it is, chasing the hunger or really collapsing into a state of what they say is boredom, and I look at as a dorsal state. When you are truly hungry, you don't care about what you eat. Like, you're starving and you'll just shove it in your mouth. Same with the 35. And when she's seeking, combined with this impatience, she's going to do the thing. It's whatever she can do in that moment to fulfill that hunger, to fulfill and provide that immediate gratification, to fill that hole, that void, she is going to do. There's not going to be a mental thought process about it. There's not going to be a conscious thought process with it. And that's where it can get really, really dangerous. And she can blame the external situations for not fulfilling her hunger. All relates to this pattern of disappointment within oneself. And you didn't provide what I needed to fulfill and substantiate my needs. So I still have to go out and chase and chase. When we see the boredom, this is when people are so repressed and collapsed that they're afraid of what their lives might become if they allow the hunger to really take over, to direct them. If you picture someone who's manic, oftentimes they struggle to sleep. There's more of a fast pace. They're speaking at a faster rate. Their body is moving quicker. That mania is really too busy to be bored. It comes from being so afraid that your life is empty, that you can't look at that hole, you can't look at that void, because that void is showing you and making you feel like there's a complete empty space in your life. So you're just going to keep going. You're going to keep chasing. You're going to keep looking for external stimuli to fulfill your hunger. There's not going to be any wisdom gained from these experiences, because ultimately they're not slowing down to really consciously reflect and be aware of why they're just consistently seeking. With Aileen, I also see her undefined throat coming into play significantly. So with an undefined throat, in the shadow state, you're seeking attention. Either you have no idea when to talk, and so when you do talk, it's not aligned, it's not in rhythm, it doesn't feel confident, it doesn't feel competent. It's not coming from your natural space. It's not coming from your natural flow. It's not coming from your genuine interest or because you genuinely have input. It's more of this forced state. It's, okay, I'm going to respond because I want to feel part of the conversation. And maybe I'm boring. Maybe I have nothing to say. Maybe I look stupid, so I need to say something. Or on the other side, you're constantly talking, and it's really like shouting from the rooftops to get that attention. I really look at the undefined throat center. These are the people that can do all different voices, right? Like, think about the amazing comedians or actors and actresses that or just people in general that can do all these different voices. I wonder if they have an undefined or open throat, because they don't have a consistent way of expressing themselves. And they're really able to attune to their environment and the people around them and deliver messages in a way that other people need to hear. They can really adapt their tone. They can really adapt their voice. The undefined throat tends to say things a few different times in a few different ways and can really get the message across consistently, though, in the gift state, where in the shadow state, you're just speaking to get attention. And you can see that she like changes up her stories depending on her needs or wants or what she's sensing people want to hear or what might get her in a better space. Maybe it'll get her off of death row. She's switching up her story. It's not maintaining consistency. I think the challenge is in the justice system too, there's a major challenge with this defined throat because there's this expectation that you keep your story the same. The undefined throat, in its gift state, it's able to deliver messages in ways that people need to hear it or are able to hear it. It's not manipulative. It's just able to get to your tone. It's able to get to your level. Whereas the defined throat has a consistent way of expressing something. I relate this a lot because I have a defined throat. My wife has an undefined throat, and it's been really interesting for me to be conscious about and to be aware of this because she's able to deliver messages in so many different ways. And for me, a lot of my conditioning and because of my impact with my defined throat, and I externalize or internalize this change in response or change in delivery as you're not being honest. I see that in the justice system too, that while they changed their story, it's inconsistent. Is it actually inconsistent or are they just delivering the message in a way that person can understand? Because if that's the case, chances are an undefined throat is going to tell the story. Say like me and an undefined throat, me and my wife are in a room. I'm going to tell the story the same way consistently. I have a very defined throat. It's attached to my identity, to this G center, and it goes to the sacral too. So actually it goes sacral up to the throat. So it's very defined. Lots going on in that defined throat. Pretty overwhelming. And I will say the same thing in the same way repeatedly, which can be really challenging depending on the people I'm around. Because when I share things, I'm sharing from my soul and I'm super passionate. I can't really dim myself down. How I feel and the expression of how I feel or how that situation's making me feel is going to come out. If it doesn't come out in my words, if it doesn't come out in my tone, it's going to come out through my body language. It's going to come out in my facial expression. Where my wife, she can navigate those different situations. She can deal with all different types of people talking, and even through conflict, she's able to meet people where they're at and say things a certain way so that the other person isn't getting triggered, where I'm like, I'm saying what I'm saying. I think that the undefined throat ultimately is looked at or perceived. And in the system, it's like someone's not telling the same story. They're not going to tell the same story with the undefined throat. However, she's definitely seeking attention. There is that line. There's that threshold of I'm talking because I'm looking for attention. You can see in some of her interviews where it's so evident that she's not being honest. Her undefined throat is representing that, because when an undefined throat says a message that's true to them, they do it with such conviction and force. It's uncanny. And you see too, like that 35 is coming off of her throat. Just some things that I think are super interesting to reflect on. And yeah, let me know how you feel. Let me know what you think.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, share the love with your friends, with your neighbors, with your coworkers, with your community, and head on over to my social media or my website. I'll leave the links in my bio and let's just share. This is really about connecting and sharing awareness because that's what intimacy is at its highest level of consciousness. Thank you so much, and we'll chat soon.